What would you think if I told you that the most magnetic kind of woman is not the one who demands attention, but the one who no longer needs it? That her silence, her calm, and her effortless presence carry a gravity that no performance could ever imitate. Once, she too searched for eyes that would see her, words that would validate her existence, gestures that would confirm she was enough. But something inside her broke, or rather, something false fell away. What emerged from that quiet collapse was not a woman who stopped caring, but one who finally began to see. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she must confront the haunting emptiness that external approval never fills. The compliments fade, the messages slow, the faces blur, and yet the ache remains. That ache is the whisper of the unintegrated self, the neglected shadow that has long been buried under layers of performance, adaptation, and pleasing. Carl Jung once said that what we deny in ourselves appears in our fate. And so many women find themselves attracting mirrors, lovers, friends, even enemies, who reflect their own unmet need for recognition. But when a woman begins to awaken, when she finally sees that her worth has never been dependent on how others perceive her, the mirror shatters. She no longer searches for herself in someone else's eyes. She no longer mistakes attention for affection or validation for love. Her energy changes, not loudly, but profoundly. She stops negotiating her boundaries for breadcrumbs of approval. She stops chasing emotional crumbs disguised as connection. She learns to sit in her own company without fear of the silence. And that silence, that sacred, uncomfortable silence, becomes her teacher. It's there, in the absence of noise, that she confronts her truest self, the one who is not performing, not pleasing, not waiting to be chosen, the one who simply is. There is something both terrifying and transcendent about a woman who no longer needs validation. To the unconscious man, she is a paradox, desirable yet untouchable, soft yet unmoved, radiant yet unreachable. His ego cannot decipher her, because he cannot control what he cannot define. She doesn't feed the masculine illusion of conquest. She doesn't orbit around his approval, nor does she collapse at his withdrawal. She stands as a mirror to his own lack of wholeness, reflecting the void he spent his life trying to fill through power, attention, and desire. To such men, her indifference feels like rejection. But to her, it is liberation. For the first time, she no longer needs to convince anyone of her worth. She has stopped auditioning for love. And if you, listening now, have ever felt that hollow craving, that almost desperate need to be seen, heard, or adored, then know this, that hunger is not a flaw. It's an echo of the little girl who once learned that love must be earned. She learned to survive by becoming what others needed her to be, agreeable, accommodating, pleasing. But that survival strategy, once necessary, became her prison. A woman who breaks that pattern is not cold, she is resurrected. She has looked into the abyss of her own loneliness and found herself there. That's what makes her dangerous, not to the world, but to the illusions that govern it. The illusion that a woman's value is in her beauty, her desirability, her compliance. She no longer fights for visibility, she becomes visibility. Her very being emits the quiet confidence of someone who knows that validation is a currency of the insecure. And this realization, though simple in theory, is revolutionary in practice. Because it demands that she detaches from everything she once thought she needed, the man who couldn't love her fully, the friends who only stayed when she dimmed her light, the world that rewarded her for being small. But this detachment is not bitterness. It's clarity. It's the peace that comes when a woman stops asking, "Am I enough?" and starts declaring, "I am." In Jungian terms, this is the process of individuation, the sacred journey of integrating every fragment of the self. She no longer disowns her strength to be liked, nor hides her tenderness to be respected. She understands that light and shadow are not enemies but twin forces of authenticity. And when those forces unite, she becomes whole. You can sense it in her presence, the steadiness of her gaze, the unhurried rhythm of her movements, the way she speaks not to impress but to express. Her words carry weight because they come from a place of knowing, not needing. Men feel it. Other women feel it. The world feels it. And yet, she owes no one an explanation for her calm, for her silence, for her refusal to chase. Because what she has cultivated within herself cannot be taken, only mirrored. This is the mystery of a woman who no longer needs validation. She is not above love, she is love, untethered from expectation. And that, perhaps, is the greatest revolution of all. There is a particular stillness that follows the woman who no longer seeks validation, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of mastery. She has learned that true power is quiet, that the loudest thing in the room is often insecurity wearing a crown. You can see it in the way she moves, with deliberate ease, neither rushing nor retreating. Her life no longer revolves around reaction. She no longer bends herself into shapes to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding her. This woman has met the full spectrum of herself, the parts that once begged for attention, the wounds that craved to be soothed by someone else's approval, the inner child that longed for a gentle gaze. She has held them all and said, "You're safe with me now." That is where her peace began. Because the truth is, no one can truly love a woman who doesn't first love her own presence. Without that foundation, love becomes dependency, a constant reaching outward instead of a rootedness within. When Jung spoke of the self, he referred to the totality of the psyche, the conscious and unconscious, light and dark, feminine and masculine. The woman who integrates these within herself no longer needs external recognition to confirm her worth. She doesn't reject validation, she simply no longer depends on it. Compliments become pleasant, not necessary. Attention becomes a reflection, not a requirement. But such liberation comes with a price, the loss of the old self, the death of the persona. Every woman who arrives at this state has, at some point, walked through fire. She has faced abandonment, betrayal, disillusionment. She has loved men who mistook her empathy for weakness, who fed on her giving until she had nothing left to offer. And when she finally turned inward, she realized that the love she had been pouring out was meant to fill her own soul first. This realization is both devastating and divine. It dismantles illusions built over a lifetime. Because when a woman stops needing validation, she also stops tolerating what once sustained her. The half-hearted affection, the conditional approval, the emotional breadcrumbs. She no longer entertains energy that diminishes her essence. Her boundaries, once porous, now stand as temples of self-respect. And yet, she is not harsh. Her strength is not armored, it is embodied. She does not shout her independence, nor does she weaponize her solitude. She simply exists in alignment. This is what unnerves those still dependent on external validation. Her detachment isn't rebellion, it's evolution. Men often find themselves inexplicably drawn to her. But it's not the kind of attraction they're used to. It's not driven by the thrill of pursuit or the vanity of conquest. It's something deeper, the subconscious recognition of her wholeness. She represents the feminine archetype in her mature form, not the maiden seeking to be chosen, but the queen who chooses. And to a man who has not yet integrated his own anima, his inner feminine, her self-possession feels like both temptation and terror. He may try to interpret her calm as disinterest, her silence as distance, her independence as pride. But what he's really sensing is his own inadequacy reflected in her stillness. Her refusal to seek his validation exposes his dependence on hers. For in truth, many men mistake validation for power. They feel strong only when desired. But when faced with a woman who desires from choice rather than need, the illusion collapses. This is the paradox of her presence. She evokes without trying, she attracts without reaching. She is magnetic precisely because she is content. In Stoic philosophy, Seneca wrote that he who is brave is free. The woman who has faced the loss of approval and lived through it has discovered this freedom. Emotional bravery, the willingness to stand alone, misunderstood, unpraised, is the purest form of strength. She no longer fears the withdrawal of attention, for she no longer mistakes it for rejection. She knows that solitude is not punishment, but preparation, a sacred container where authenticity matures. And when she emerges from that solitude, something in her energy has changed. The world feels it. Conversations shift, connections deepen, and superficiality begins to fall away. She no longer invests in people who require her to shrink to be loved. She speaks less, but means more. She no longer explains her boundaries, because her energy makes them known. If you've ever met such a woman, you remember her, not for her words, but for the quiet certainty she carries. She's not performing detachment, she is detachment, born of understanding. Her validation now flows inward, from purpose, from creativity, from the knowing that she belongs to herself. And perhaps the most profound truth is this: once a woman experiences the serenity of self-approval, she cannot unlearn it. The craving for external validation becomes like sugar after tasting honey, shallow, fleeting, unnecessary. This is how she rises, not with fanfare, not in defiance, but in deep alignment with who she has always been beneath the noise. There comes a day when even her reflection begins to look different, not because her features have changed, but because her eyes now hold the calm of someone who no longer seeks permission to exist. That gaze, once searching for recognition, now reflects something grounded and ancient, the essence of a woman who has reclaimed herself from the projections of others. She understands now that most of what people call love is often projection, the ego's attempt to possess what it cannot integrate within. Men have adored her, yes, but rarely have they seen her. They saw a reflection of their desire, their fantasy, their unhealed mother wound, their longing for the feminine to soothe their unrest. And she, unaware of her own power, once mistook that projection for connection. But love, as she has learned, begins where projection ends. The path to that realization was not graceful. It came through disillusionment, through nights of questioning her worth, through moments where silence from others felt like erasure. Yet every unanswered message, every absence, every rejection became part of her awakening. For each was a lesson in sovereignty, teaching her that external withdrawal is not abandonment when one is anchored within. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, and wholeness for her has meant owning the parts of herself she once abandoned. The emotional, the wild, the intuitive, the unapologetic. For so long she dimmed those qualities to be palatable, to be chosen. But there comes a sacred rage in the awakening woman, not the rage that destroys, but the rage that clarifies. It burns away the pretense, leaving only what is real. And what is real is this: she no longer confuses attention for love. Attention can be bought, manipulated, or performed. Love cannot. Love requires presence, not performance. And now, she gives that presence first to herself. This shift changes everything. Her conversations deepen, her relationships refine, her circle shrinks but strengthens. People sense that they cannot approach her with masks, for hers have fallen away. To the unaware, her energy feels intimidating, as though her peace is a challenge. But to those on their own path, it feels like an invitation, an unspoken reminder that freedom is possible. In Jungian terms, she has withdrawn her projections. No longer does she cast her inner masculine onto others, expecting them to fulfill her sense of safety, structure, or recognition. She has found those qualities within. This integration births a new kind of feminine, one who no longer oscillates between dependency and defiance. She doesn't reject love, she simply doesn't beg for it. She doesn't compete for attention, she radiates it. Men who encounter her often sense something unfamiliar, not resistance, but depth. She listens, but not to please. She speaks, but not to persuade. She feels, but not to manipulate. There's an authenticity in her that dismantles pretense. The games that once captivated her now bore her. The dramas that once consumed her now dissolve before they can take root. She no longer chases closure, because she has made peace with ambiguity. And that, perhaps, is her quiet superpower. She can hold uncertainty without losing herself. In the language of the soul, this is evolution. She has moved from the archetype of the maiden, who seeks to be chosen, to the queen, who chooses herself. This shift is not merely emotional, it is spiritual. Her worth no longer fluctuates with the tides of approval. It stands unmoved, like a mountain weathered by time. The Stoics would say she has mastered apatheia, not apathy, but inner tranquility born from detachment. She feels deeply, yet she is not enslaved by emotion. Praise and criticism now carry the same weight, neither inflate her nor wound her. For she knows that both are reflections of the speaker, not definitions of her. You can almost sense her aura before she speaks, that equilibrium that comes only from someone who has faced their shadow and survived. She no longer hides the parts of herself that once scared others. She has made peace with her contradictions, the softness and the fire, the tenderness and the strength. She has realized that to be whole is not to be perfect, but to be authentic. And when she walks into a room, there's a quiet command in her presence. It's not about dominance, it's about self-containment. She no longer leaks energy trying to be liked. Her approval, once scattered across the world, has come home. If you look closely, you'll notice that the world treats her differently. Not because it has changed, but because she has. Energy, after all, is reciprocal. When she stopped chasing validation, validation began to find her. But this time, she doesn't need to hold on to it. She smiles, accepts it, and lets it pass, for she knows it's not her source, merely a reflection of her light. This is the mystery. The less she needs from others, the more powerfully she connects. The more she detaches, the more magnetic she becomes. And this magnetism is not born of effort, but of essence, the kind that cannot be faked, only embodied. Some women carry a presence that cannot be negotiated. It is not arrogance, it is the quiet authority of someone who has met the void and returned intact. She has stared into the mirror of her own rejection, her own self-doubt, and she has refused to shrink. There is a courage here that is invisible yet palpable, a defiance that does not seek to provoke but simply is. She has learned to navigate the world without crutches. No compliment can lift her higher than she already stands. No gaze can validate her deeper than she has validated herself. This is not perfection, it is conscious sovereignty. She no longer seeks permission, nor does she tolerate coercion. Her energy delineates boundaries not with bitterness, but with clarity. And in this clarity there is freedom, for her and paradoxically for those around her. The men who encounter her often misinterpret her quietude. They read her peace as aloofness, her detachment as pride, her self-possession as something to conquer. But what they are sensing is not indifference, it is mastery. She has recognized the illusions they chase, the narratives they perform, and she has no need to participate. She does not play the game of being seen, she has transcended it. Her past relationships, once the crucible of longing and compromise, have forged her into someone who understands attraction at its most primal level. Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden, unacknowledged aspects of the self. She has embraced hers, integrated its lessons, and thus she no longer projects need onto others. She no longer seeks in others what she cannot provide herself. Her love, when offered, is full, untainted by desperation or expectation. The psychology of her presence is complex and magnetic. By refusing to seek validation, She creates a vacuum that draws projection. People instinctively want her approval, her attention, her energy, and yet she remains unclaimed. She has become a paradox of accessibility and distance, a woman whose value is recognized without being granted. Her power is subtle, yet undeniable. Her magnetism is natural, yet transformative. Stoics understood this in principle, though few achieve it in practice. Marcus Aurelius wrote that true strength is in the mind's discipline over desire. The woman who no longer seeks validation embodies this principle with the body, the heart, and the soul. She has disciplined her longing. She has disciplined her reactions. She has disciplined her dependency. And in this discipline, she experiences the freedom that the uninitiated mistake for detachment. Yet detachment, in her case, is not coldness. She can love fiercely, deeply, without clinging. She can engage fully in life without being enslaved to outcomes. She can give without draining herself, because she is already replenished from within. This is a dangerous kind of beauty, because it cannot be possessed, only witnessed, respected, and occasionally mirrored. Trauma, heartbreak, and unmet needs were once her teachers. They taught her the fragility of seeking validation outside herself. She learned that dependency, even under the guise of intimacy, is an illusion. People can leave, opinions can shift, attention can fade, and if her sense of self had relied on these external forces, she would have been left hollow, vulnerable, undone. But through shadow work and introspection, she has built herself into someone impervious to conditional love. And so, she moves through life differently. She doesn't measure her worth by the reflection of others' eyes. She doesn't negotiate her presence for approval. She doesn't apologize for existing fully, for speaking her truth, for choosing her own path. Her very being carries the subtle authority of someone who has claimed her own soul. To witness such a woman is to witness a quiet revolution. The world, accustomed to negotiating feminine attention as currency, is disarmed by her sovereignty. She challenges every unconscious expectation, every projection of need, every subtle attempt to possess. She is not there to please. She is there to be. And when a man who is whole encounters her, it is a meeting of equals. There is no chase, no imbalance, no silent desperation. There is recognition, mutual, grounded, mature. But for the unwhole, she is an enigma, a riddle that cannot be solved by ego alone. Her presence exposes their incompleteness, reflecting back what they have refused to integrate within themselves. She has become the embodiment of self-approval, the living demonstration that the deepest power of the feminine is not in pleasing or performing, but in knowing and owning. Her life is no longer about who sees her, who chooses her, or who validates her. It is about presence, authenticity, and sovereignty. And in this truth, she is free. She has arrived at a rare and luminous place, the place where needing ends and choosing begins. The woman who no longer seeks validation has shed the weight of other people's expectations, their judgments, their fleeting attentions. She has walked through fire, endured the frost of indifference, felt the sting of abandonment, and emerged whole, untethered, unshakable. In her presence, there is neither pretense nor performance. Every gesture, every glance, every word carries the quiet assurance of someone who belongs entirely to herself. She does not speak to impress, does not act to please, does not wait to be rescued. Her attention is offered freely, her love given fully, but never as a plea. She has discovered the deep well of inner approval, and in that well she drinks endlessly, replenished and serene. The masculine, confronted with her equilibrium, often reacts instinctively. Some are drawn, some are unsettled, some cannot comprehend a woman who moves through life without orbiting their ego. She does not meet projection with projection, she meets presence with presence. She has integrated her shadow, embraced her desires, and reconciled the contradictions within herself. And in that integration lies her magnetic power, not a power that demands or coerces, but a power that radiates truth, clarity, and authenticity. She has discovered that freedom is not about isolation, but alignment. She can stand alone because she has become whole. She can love deeply because she no longer confuses love with dependence. She can speak without fear because silence no longer terrifies her. Her life is not curated to impress, it is lived to embody. And this embodiment, the living, breathing assertion of self-possession, is both her gift and her revolution. In the stillness of her presence, the world feels the quiet authority of self-approval. No validation can define her, no external measure can contain her. She has chosen herself, and that choice is immutable. She has become the woman who exists fully, fiercely, tenderly, and freely, a woman whose worth emanates from within, untouched by the tides of opinion, untouched by absence or neglect. And in this ultimate truth, there is peace. The longing for recognition has been replaced with the profound knowing that she is already enough, that she has always been enough, that nothing outside herself can add to or diminish her essence. She has arrived at the summit of feminine power, a power born not of demand, but of quiet mastery, not of seeking but of being. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.